We're at the Greenpeace office in Vancouver today, speaking with one of the organization's founders, Bill Darnell. He speaks with me about the humble and auspicious beginnings of Greenpeace and the mission that has made it a force to be reckoned with in the environmental movement ever since. Bring us back to the early days, the very start of Greenpeace, and I'm just curious about what exactly inspired a group of folks to get up and take action. There was a lot of talk, I'm sure, but it's one thing to talk; it's another thing for people to actually organize and say, okay, we're going to do something about it and call ourselves something. And I think you had something to say about that too.
Right. I came here and I joined a group called the Company of Young Canadians, which was a federal government volunteer program. So you'd volunteer to work in a community for 2 years, given an allowance, so you could put it at full time. And there was training. And so the thing that I got involved with was the environment, or anti-pollution as it was called then. And there was a lot of things happening around then. The Sierra Club was coming to BC, the SPEC was just rising up. And
where's SPEC from?
SPEC is just a local group. It was Gwen and Derek Mallard, this couple from Coquitlam, a suburb, just said, everybody was up to here with pulp mills and mines and oil tankers and all that kind of stuff. And they finally said, and it was Rachel Carson, the Silent Spring, all those kinds of things coming together. People concerned about freeways, like from Toronto, people were trying to stop the Spadina. Here we took inspiration from that, and also we don't have any freeways in Vancouver.
No.
Because we stopped them.
There really was a movement?
Oh yeah, there was a very big plan to put freeways all over through the downtown. Okay. And so all those kinds of things were happening. They were logging on the North Shore, on the mountains, and building dams in the Skagit, and flooding valleys, and all this stuff. So people just got really pissed off, and the U.S. was testing these nuclear weapons out on Amchitka. So they had been testing in the South Pacific. There was I looked it up, there was almost 1,000 tests that the U.S. had been doing, the Atomic Energy Commission. And they had devastated the Marshall Islands in the southern Pacific there. And then they moved it to New Mexico, but that's pretty close to Las Vegas, and everything shakes when you set it off, so that wasn't very good. So then how can we do it in the national territory of the U.S., and what's the farthest away we can get? So that's the Aleutian. That's Amchitka, way out on the Aleutian chain, and kind of provocatively very close to the Soviet Union at the time too.
Right.
So they were testing these anti-ballistic missile warheads, and they had done 2, and they were announced the 3rd one for the fall of 1971. And there was the Sierra Club had come, and so one of the media outlets here, can't remember if it was Printer or Air, called up Jim Boland from the Sierra Club and said, Jim, the U.S. has announced that they're going to put off this test in the fall of 1971. What's the Sierra Club going to do? And Marie, his wife, from across the room, said, we're sending a ship.
She just said
Just like that. That's how it happened. I mean,
okay.
We were standing on 25 years of protests and demonstrations against nuclear weapons, and the Quakers there had been lots of stuff going on in Vancouver, and one of the Quakers' traditions is to bear witness.
Right.
So when something is happening that's wrong in the world, immoral, the Quakers, being nonviolent, would go and bear witness to it and shine a light on it. So they called. So they said, okay, well, I guess we better get the committee together. And so I was working in all those circles with the Sierra Club and SPEC, and we formed the Don't Make a Wave committee.
Right.
Because in 1964 there had been a big earthquake out in the Aleutians, and this big tsunami had come across the Pacific. And we're sort of protected by Vancouver Island, but Port Alberni, which is at the end of an inlet on the west coast was just devastated. They blew up the downtown, and Kodiak, Alaska had been all smashed up too. So people were really worried about that, and so that's why the Don't Make a Wave committee, puns happened.
Got it.
And so we were meeting. Okay, well, we're going. I guess we need a boat. Where are we going to get a boat? How are we going to get some money? Irving Stowe was a lawyer, so he was drafting petitions, and he had a real sense of promotion, and so he was we were making buttons. I mean, the way we started raising money was selling buttons at 25 cents a piece downtown.
What did the buttons say?
They just said, well, at that time they said Greenpeace.
Oh, really? Already? Okay.
Yeah, because we were having the meetings, and Irving at the end of the meeting. So Irving is he's a Quaker, but he was raised, his culture is Jewish, so
Okay.
and he's from Rhode Island, so he's very sort of that. But he kind of remade himself into a counterculture guy. So he'd say peace at the end of every meeting, and I was doing all this anti-pollution stuff, just kind of getting my eyes open to all this. And so I said, well, we should make it a Greenpeace. And
It stuck.
It stuck. Irving came back the next meeting and said, that's really good. I really like that. That puts those two things together. So we decided that would be the name, and we were going to put it on a button, and we had a graphic artist to do that, and he said, if we leave a space between green and peace, we're not going to be able to get it all on the button. So crammed it together, and that was Greenpeace.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's sort of how it started, and this was the right place. Bob Hunter, in one of his books, Greenpeace to Amchitka, which is really an excellent account. He, being a journalist, he just kept notes for the whole 6 weeks we were out there, and then wrote a book right away when we came back.
Wow.
But in those days, even though we were kind of a success and kind of a failure, like we didn't stop that test.
I was just going to ask you, so you didn't stop it?
No, we didn't. We sailed out there, and it's a long way to Amchitka, especially on an 85-foot halibut boat, and so we had to leave, and they hadn't given a date for it. They said probably October, and then when we were out there, they said no, we've delayed the test. So we got as far as Akutan, and then we had to just hang around, waiting for them to declare it, and then everybody. Well, I was on the journalists, Ben Metcalf and Bob Cummings, and I think maybe Richard Feinberg and Bob Hunter were probably getting paid. But a lot of guys the doctor, Lyle, had got somebody to take over his practice, he was not making any money, and Jim Bowen was on holidays. And
What about you?
I was still on my training allowance. The federal government was paying me. I was probably the only civil servant on the voyage. So we ended up coming back, turning around and coming back, and talking to, we went to Kodiak, and then we went to, trying to remember all the towns, we went to Juneau and maybe Skagway, and all the way down the coast, the Alaska Panhandle, and then down the Inside Passage, talking to people, and everybody on the coast was totally opposed to it. The Alaskans were totally opposed to it. Like, really, you're gonna just take a bomb and throw it in our backyard and not ask us about it?
And how long was the entire journey?
6 weeks.
6 weeks there and back?
Yeah.
And yet you call it a successful journey as it's been documented.
Right.
So despite the fact that you weren't able to stop it from happening, and you turned back before they actually.
Yeah, we were back in Vancouver when the bomb
went off. So you turned back because you couldn't be out there forever, and they were delaying the.
We had a little boat, and this is
right.
Have you seen that show, The Deadliest Catch?
Yes?
Yeah,
That was what you were on.
That's what, a little boat about that size and in that water.
And you guys you bought that boat with money?
No, John Cormack. Phyllis Cormack was the name of the boat. His wife, John Cormack, chartered the boat to us. He was the only person crazy enough to do that. You know, like, really, you want to sail it into a nuclear weapons test site? And oh yeah, I'll take my boat, no problem. You know.
Right.
So he agreed to do that, and you know that was so. There's 12 of us on board, and there was John, and then he brought his engineer Dave Birmingham on, and they were really Jim Bolin had been in the Navy in the Second World War, but the rest of us were landlubbers or mattress lovers, as John would call us, and he was used to a boat that would have a crew of 3 or 4 or 5 maybe, and we had 12. There were bunks for 12, but you never carried that many guys when you're fishing. And we were always in the way, and I was the cook, and I'm kind of I'm all nutrition and Adele Davis, and I eat right and everything, and John's kind of like, where are the cookies, and no pies, and cake, and so we
Did you get along with everyone? Like, was it a good cohesive group?
Yes and no. I mean, we were all of a purpose. I think John was kind of fascinated in a sort of like, who the heck are these guys kind of way. We had worked together in the committee. There were clashes. I mean, because we ended up sitting around in Sandpoint for a couple of weeks, waiting for the test to be called.
Right.
And so 12 guys in a room that's about half the size of this.
Yeah.
You kind of get on each other's nerves,
Yeah.
But we were tied up so we could get off and walk around Sandpoint and things like that. But it was difficult, and then eventually we couldn't decide. There wasn't consensus on to go forward, to go back. And
Okay.
so basically Jim is the leader of the Don't Make a Wave committee, which was sponsoring this whole voyage. So, talked to Irving and said, no, we're going back.
So you turn back,
Mm-hmm.
and yet, as you mentioned, it was a successful journey. So the success was based on what? The fact that you were able to get promotion, like to get a
Well,
word out there?
this was the third of 8 tests. There was a series of 8 that had been called for. What they were doing was, it's crazy. Like they went out to Amchitka, which is a wildlife refuge, to start with. Just totally ignored that. Drilled a shaft about 4.5 feet wide, a mile deep into the ground, and they had like 3,000 men and women out there over the period of time digging this shaft, and they would then lower the warhead down into the shaft, and then they would backfill it, and then they would blow it off and create this cavern. Like, it's like 1,000,000 degrees when it goes off down there, and there's this huge cavern of radioactive material.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys got this low-level exposure, and so a lot of them died of cancer. And then, quite far down the road, and there was a big fight. But so really, there's no good side to building a bomb. Like the people for whom they blow it up on, that's obviously bad. But the people building the bomb, who think this is a job, are out destroying wildlife refuges and getting cancer in the same way.
Right.
So it's just and tearing a family apart. You move from Colombia to Los Angeles and then stay with your grandma while your dad goes. And so what happened was, on February of the next year, 1972, the Atomic Energy Commission announced very quietly that they'd cancel the rest of the tests.
And was that, you think, a
Well,
result?
that was us, yeah. Yeah, because when the test went off on November the 4th, well, before that, Charles Templeton and Pierre Burton sponsored a big petition, and in those days, petitions were pencil and paper, right? So they had this huge stack of pages that they delivered to the U.S. government. Trudeau called Nixon. A bunch of U.S.ers went to the Supreme Court at the last minute to get an injunction. That failed. When the bomb went off, the bridge between Niagara Falls and Buffalo, or Port Erie, I guess Buffalo, was closed down. The bridge to Detroit from Windsor was closed down. People just the border here was closed down. Yeah, like it was obvious that this was sort of politically impossible to keep doing.
And do you think what you your boat out there help spur the
Oh yeah,
different activities?
yeah. We were the kind of the focus for it,
Yeah.
the inspiration. Irving's son Bob, who was a teenager at the time and was going to high school here, he and a couple of other people had a committee, and no internet, no cell phones, no nothing. Just organized a spontaneous walkout of high school students. So they, on a particular day in October, while we were there, they just had a walkout. So all the North Shore high schools, all the Vancouver high schools, not all of them, but a lot of them, Burnaby, New Westminster, kids just walked out. They didn't ask permission. They said, this is important. They walked down to the American consulate on Georgia Street, and there was 10,000 students. And they just closed the downtown, So everybody was kind of inspired by, everybody was ready to go. They just needed something to make it happen. It's kind of like climate change now. Everybody's ready to go. Everybody's really, like that last fall, the big walk, the big march in New York City. Like the biggest they'd ever seen. People all across North America coming for that. What's going to happen in Paris next year? It's
Same idea.
Yeah. It's just waiting for the right moment.
And you created the right moment in a sense,
we did.
yeah. And there was also a concert with were you at that concert? How did that come about?
Well, Irving said we need some money and Buttons aren't making it. So he said, well, why don't we have a concert? I said, I'll organize it. He actually had a history of recording, doing some really early recording of black musicians in New York and in the eastern United States. So he organized the concert. He had, and he just, through the Georgia Straight, the local alternative newspaper, he became a rock promoter and got some help. And so he got Joni Mitchell and Phil Oakes and Chilliwack all agreed to come. And Joni said, can I bring James Taylor? And Irving went home and talked to Barbara and Bobby, his children, said, she wants to bring James Taylor. Who's that? And she said, Dad, say yes, say yes, say yes. So they all came and they played, and it was, we raised $17,000. And
was it enough?
That was enough.
Okay.
I think it cost $3 to go to the concert.
Okay. Wow.
At the P&E.
Really good days. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious, when you look at the beginnings and how it all started and what inspired it, the tactics that were chosen in terms of, how you're going to go about making change, how you're going to be activists in terms of getting a boat, going to the spot, taking a stand. Were those tactics the same type that you feel is what sort of inspired Greenpeace over the years? Is that the type of approach? Is it civil disobedience? Is it something? What was it part of the mission already of how you're going to go about making that change? It's a very specific, unique type of approach.
I think the thing that made it a key part to being successful and a key thing that's carried on in Greenpeace is making sure that the message gets out through all the media. So we had 4 journalists on board. Bob Hunter, who was a regular counterculture columnist for the Vancouver Sun. Bob Cummings, who wrote for the Georgia Straight, so that was the other side of the media. Ben Metcalf, who was a CBC journalist and had worked with Reuters and had been in the Second World War and was sort of the old guy who had all the stories, and skills. And then Richard Feinberg, who was a researcher but wrote for Alaska. He was a USer, so he had that perspective. And so they made sure the story got out, and Dorothy Metcalf, who was Ben's wife, and a journalist too. She didn't go. But she staffed the sort of the hub back here, and she made sure it got out to everybody. And so that was huge.
So making sure that you got the news out. Out.
Yeah.
That was.
Sometimes it was when we were in Akutan, the guys were lining up to use the one phone in town, or we had a sideband radio, and it was sort of depending on where you were, you might be able to get it out. There wasn't any satellite phones or anything like that. So it was, but they got it out, and they were always taking notes. Oh, and the CBC no, the NFB had given us a 16 millimeter projector, and so Ben was taking pictures, and the whole focus of this was stopping nuclear weapons testing. And so that was the peace part and the green part. But when we came back, the French were still testing in the atmosphere in the South Pacific, in Mururoa, which is 6 kinds of crazy, right? Like they'd set up a balloon in with a nuclear weapon and blow it up, and so we were we were trying to stop that. That seemed to be the next logical thing to do, and that happened with David McTaggart, who was a Vancouver guy living in New Zealand. He said, "I'll send a boat," and we said, "We'll send some money," and he went 3 times, and but then he sort of had this kind of image or reputation, and so Paul Spong, who was a psychologist and was studying whales, approached Greenpeace, particularly Bob Hunter, and sort of said, well, Bob was the one who really understood the message and said, they're slaughtering the whales to extinction, and they are sentient creatures. They're easily as smart as we are, bigger brains, and we have to do something. And so at that point, Greenpeace was sort of torn, and where are we going, this way or that way? And with Bob, it went that way. I didn't go that way.
What way did you go?
I sort of stopped being a real Greenpeace activist at that point.
So how long were you involved with Greenpeace?
3 years.
Okay.
I still had the activist bug. I mean, I've been an activist, but it was kind of like, I guess I was a little more traditional. I was becoming a carpenter then, and so I got involved in labor politics and labor activism, and I've continued to be doing environmental things through the time, but that's kind of where Greenpeace went to the whaling part there, and then really, when people sort of saw, and again the journalists made sure that people saw what was happening to the whales, the slaughter that was going on just off the coast of the U.S. There was huge outrage, again, just similar to what had happened about the nuclear weapons testing. And then Greenpeace started popping up all over the place. People said, like, kind of like Speck had done here, like, oh yeah, well, they're dumping nuclear waste just off the coast of England or Holland, so they started something. And then people saying, well, they're strip mining here, or they're, clear cutting of forests over here, and so people started popping up all over the place.
And they started getting involved in a lot of different issues. I mean, I diverged, right? Which is still, I guess, the case today. There's a lot of different issues that make... And you're not affiliated with Greenpeace today, are you?
Well...
Or in some informally, or
I sort of feel like I'm kind of like Uncle Greenpeace.
Yes, I think that's how they... Yes.
Greenpeace Emeritus, like... I'm of the 12 of us who sailed, I think there's only 5 of us who are still alive. So it's still a story that's within our lifetimes, and so it's important to tell the story.
Absolutely.
And because a lot of people who weren't born then, it's easy to lose sight of the story. And Greenpeace is this 3 million, used to be 5 million member organization with these huge budgets and headquarters and ships, and it looks kind of like, oh man, how do I ever get doing that? And really, it started in the church basement of the Unitarian Church here, and the Stowe's living room. 20 people sitting around saying, no, this is bullshit. We really need to do something about it. How are we going to raise the money?
Yeah.
And I think Greenpeace is I'm not really involved in Greenpeace right now, but from what I can sort of see, that discussion's going on within Greenpeace now about how do we make sure we get back to our roots where we're decentralized. Like wherever we look, people are looking at decentralized energy systems and local food and local economies and local currencies, and so it's local activism too.
Yeah. So
how do we get back to doing the local activism? How do we use all these resources we have to kind of knit us together as a activist community? And Greenpeace works, like on the Great Bear Rainforest here.
Yeah. Greenpeace
works in concert with lots of other groups. I mean, it's nobody can go out, and these are long-term battles. We sort of did a 6-week, well, it was actually 2 years to get everything together, get in, get out kind of thing, and it was huge. But But if you're going to long term, you have to have better organization and more sophisticated skills and things. And there's some pretty amazing people working out here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but I hear you. And just one other. I was looking back also at the origins. I mean, this could have started technically in a lot of different countries. But was there something about Canada at that time? And you kind of alluded to. And I'm just wondering, like Vancouver, Canada. I guess because also, like you said, the Americans were coming in. Right. So they had to be converging in this space.
Like Canada welcomed people who didn't want to go to Vietnam and kill or be killed.
Right.
So they were people who were dodging the draft, who were welcome to come here.
Yeah.
The Bolins, the Stows, lots of people. Vancouver was really, the West Coast is a little more, it's just not as old and as established, so it's a little more open and freer, and so people tended to come this way. People like me who just couldn't see working in an office in downtown Toronto came here,
Right.
There was the whole sort of hippie back to the land movement. There was a history of activism here too, because the people who are sort of unhappy and unsettled with the way things are and got up and moved here, so there was a greater concentration of people opposing freeways. And I try to quote Bob Hunter, but he has this great paragraph in his book about freeway stoppers, Trotskyists, anti-pollutionists, people against clear cutting, nudists, Buddhists, that's when the Vancouver Folk Music Festival started. There were be-ins, there were Hare Krishnas on the corner. It was just, there was all kinds of possibility happening then, So.
And everything sort of converged.
Yeah, and Canada was politically, in our international reputation, was quite a different country than it is now. Before Harper, it had this sort of reputation of being the sort of the rational middle power, and so I think, that couldn't have happened in the States. It was much too polarized, and it wasn't so polarized here, and the West Coast was the place for it to happen. Yeah.
Okay. And looking back now, looking back at where it's come from, where the origins, and did you anticipate it becoming this huge?
No, I'm involved. I've been involved in lots of other activist activities to try and achieve things, and none of them have turned out like this.
What do you think accounts for that? Was it the people?
Yeah, it's the right moment. I think like you can't push the river. You have to kind of go with the flow, but recognize like when it's sort of all coming together, and be prepared to sort of step up, and you have to have done your work. You have to have done your homework, and you have to. Like all this sort of stuff looks like, something had happened, but no, actually there were people talking about this and researching and doing a lot of work for a long, long time, and then it just, enough things came together and it tipped over. I think people are, I think the one to look for is what's going to happen around climate change. When the Pope puts out his encyclical, when Naomi Klein publishes her book, when, groups like the IMF and the Atomic Energy Internet, I can't remember that, big international energy organizations all say, no, this is real. I think those big marches in the U.S., like this is about our culture and capitalism and everything changing, and so it's a huge change, and it's going to be really difficult to do. But it's really hopeful. There's all kinds of good things happening below the radar right now. Lots of people talking, and lots of people really getting to figuring it out. I think the thing that's really the most important is some people call it the struggle, but I think it's actually the relationships. It's like. You do all this work, and you meet people, and you have common grounds, and you support each other, and you build relationships that even though you might not stop whatever you're trying to stop, or you build a part of a community that's the foundation for everything that goes along. So all those people who worked on banning the bomb for 25 years, hasn't happened yet. Still, there's still a lot of nuclear weapons out there, but it's backed off some, and that was the result of people doing a lot of work. So it became part of the culture, and then Vancouver had Walk for Peace after that, an annual event where at its height there was 100,000 people in the street in Vancouver, walking to, and Vancouver's a nuclear weapons free zone.
And just the last thing I was going to touch upon was lessons learned for you in terms of being an activist. Like, what would you tell someone that was starting out, if you were at your age?
Right.
How old were you when you first got involved with Greenpeace? Were you in your
23, 24.
So someone comes to you at that age and says, okay, I want to also make a change. And I want
Yeah. What
would you tell me? Does it have to be audacious? Does it have to be something big?
No, I think, well, I've been sort of thinking about this. I've been talking to activist groups, students and groups within the healthcare system and university students and things like that, and there's sort of 5 things, if I can remember them. Like one is don't work alone. Like if you try to do this alone, and sometimes people sort of feel like there's nobody, nobody's paying attention, they got to go, so they say you got to find people who you can work with, because it's so big and it's so emotionally difficult that you can't sustain it. Make mistakes. You're gonna make lots of mistakes. That's not a reason to stop. You're gonna be scared. So okay, just recognize you're gonna be scared, and if you've got somebody with you, you can be scared together. And that's a little different than terrified. You probably don't want to be terrified, because that just kind of freezes you, but you're going to be scared about this stuff. So you deal with the fear, and then keep going. Mm-hmm. Have fun while you're doing it. Like, you got to celebrate the victories, and you got to just be able to laugh when you're doing it. And the other thing is connect. When we were on the Greenpeace, we got stopped. We screwed up. We went into the U.S. Illegally, and so the big cutters out there, 5 times bigger than our boat, and they come over in a little inflatable, and there's 2 enlisted guys holding the boat on, and while the commander's up yelling at them, and so he started telling all this bad news, and so we start talking to these 2 guys who are hanging on the rail there, and they hand us this piece of paper. And we, a cup of coffee, how's it going, peace, yeah, hey, how are you guys, where are you from, here's a poster, and they hand us a piece of paper that say, we, the crew of the Confidence, believe in what you're doing is for the good of all mankind, and if it weren't for these military bonds, we would be with you 100%, good luck. And they signed their names, 23 of them of the crew, and we're kind of like, it was that and the students in downtown Vancouver were the 2 most sort of moving moments of this whole thing, where you just sort of see other people's hearts open up and they just step forward and do it. And if we had treated those guys as the enemy, which they were military, they were U.S. military, that was who's setting off the bomb. I mean, they were Coast Guard, not the other services, but we could have made the mistake. But we connected with them, and this huge connection happened. And then, of course, we said, can we use it? And they said, oh, sure. And the journalists are like, wow, there's a story. And they all got in trouble. But that thing, you have to connect. You have to connect with it. And like Nelson Betancourt, his dad was technically one of the bad guys building the bomb. But you have to connect with him, because we all share this common humanity. And it's just capitalism and the military and industrial approach, for profit making is one that's keeping us all separate and fearful and isolated. And the best thing you can do is find other people, and work together. And that's the rich parts of life. Like I'm retired. I'm old enough now, and really what it is it's the relationships. It's like your grandkids, your kids, your family, your neighbors, your colleagues, your compañeros,
That's great. Thank you.